What up, y'all? I'm Cyrus. I'm a biologist and ethnobotanist. To give you my accolades here, I've been foraging for 20 years. Grew up in Austin, have a biology degree, studied ethnobotany in graduate school, and have spent the last 10 years doing research and writing a book on the uses of Texas plants by Indigenous North Americans. I'm coming this way because there's a really interesting species at the end of it, and it's something that I've known about for a really long time, but it's something that I've just sort of kept in the back of my mind. Oh, I think this plant's edible, and I think this plant actually might be a really useful plant food. The thing is, it's not a native species. There's a lot of history behind it. We'll see that at the end. But on the way, there's going to be a ton of edible and useful stuff, and I'll try to give you the quickest, unscripted, just briefest rundown of practical uses of each plant species. This habitat right here is sort of the historical savanna. So let's start. Okay, bullnettle, Nidoscoles texanus, mala mujer. You do not want to touch this. It has these needles. It's way worse than stinging nettle or anything else. I would rather be touched by any plant ever in all of the area except for this one. It really is painful, but the seeds of it are edible, and the roots probably as well. The Seri in the Baja California ate the roots of various Nidoscoles species, a pretty important food source. And we'll see more of these. I saw a lot of them earlier. Prickly pear, obviously you can eat the prickly pears, and they're in season right now. All you have to do is rub off the spines. You can use a water grass or a brush, or pick a piece of buckskin. But the tender young fruits are also edible. Those little white spots are also useful cochineal bugs that are vibrant red dye, carmine dye, used for thousands of years for dyeing fabric in Mexico and South America. Some soapberry. You can use the berries for soap. Juniper, I always have that for tea and for incense, but the fruits are edible and delicious, and a great general medicine for cough and cold, especially cough, with the needles in the fruits. Useful that way. Insanely useful for all sorts of things, such as fire starting. The juniper bark is probably the best tinder material in the area. This is Rus lanceolata, flame leaf sumac. Its fruits are absolutely delicious, very tart and sweet. I don't see any on the trees right now, but this is the tallest sumac in Central Texas. All of the sumacs have edible fruits, and they're all tart red berries. This one can get up to 30 feet tall. Lanceolata comes from the lance-like shapes of the leaves, and it has a little sort of reddish tint. There's a lot of things generally kind of look like this in the area, but sumac has this nice reddish tint to it. And also, if you can see in that central rachis of the leaves, there's like a little bit of leaf material coming out from that. It's sort of a winged rachis. But I don't have any evidence of this being used by indigenous peoples. Here's some of the fruits. These are really small ones. I'm not sure what's going on with these individuals, but normally they're about twice that size. They have a very nice, tart, sweet taste. You can mix them with water and make a nice little sumacade, a little beverage. That was actually a very common method used by indigenous peoples for various species of sumac. But as you can see right here, it's got the very distinct reddish tint to it. And the reason it's called flame leaf sumac is the leaves actually change color and turn reddish and orange or yellow in the fall. And so if you can imagine, it actually looks quite flame-like. Very beautiful. Ranges all the way to northeast Texas. Can't forget the smaller things. So, well, this isn't a good spot for small things. I'm about to walk into the forest. But right here, maybe I'll save this to see if I can find one with fruits. Well, I'll just tell you it's gum bumelia, cedar island, lanuginosum. Its fruits are not very well known as edible, but they're sweet. I think they taste great. It looks like an oak tree, except it has thorns. The sap is also edible, and the gum, the Kiowa used it for chewing gum. But these little blackberries are really nice. We'll see if we can find some because they're ripe right now. This is always a good one to be aware of, poison ivy. It's actually in the sumac family, but unlike the sumacs, it has fruits that are smooth, tan to green or white, or colorless basically, and dangle down more rather than being borne erect. And it has compound leaves where the outer leaves are symmetrically lobed, look like little mitts, and the central one is symmetrically lobed around its central axis, and this petiole is pretty long. The closest thing that looks like to it is the boxelder, Acer negundo, but those have opposite leaf orientation, whereas these are alternate. And yes, I can touch it, I'm immune. This is also extremely common in the area, stretchberry. Also, its leaf orientation is a good diagnostic character. As you can see, these are opposite. Well, no, they're not opposite actually. They kind of appear to be opposite and often are just close to it, but they can be alternate too. But what they do differently is come off at like a 90-degree angle like that. So elbow bush is another common name for this. This is Foraging pubescens. Pubescens refers to the pubescence of the leaves. They're nice and fuzzy and soft, but these have very juicy and sweet fruits that are purple, and those ripen in late spring, and you can gather an insane amount because it's like half the understory in this area is full of nothing but stretchberries, and their fruits can be a little bit tough to spot sometimes, and don't produce super well every year. But this year I gathered insane amounts of stretchberry, and it's a little bit different taste. It's in the olive family, but yeah, I think it's really good and sweet. Another really great one that I also always have on hand is Ilex vomitori, yaupon holly. There's another holly in the area, possumhaw, but that one has a tapered leaf base. Excuse me. These are very glossy and thick and have these crenate or wavy leaf margins. They're simple and ovate, and the leaf size can vary drastically. Sometimes the whole tree, the leaves are nothing but these size, and then other times they can be bigger than this. And they have holly-like fruits. These berries will turn red when they're ripe, but they're not edible. And it's a very common element of the southeast understory. And it was used historically by basically every native tribe in the area, very commonly prepared in what is known as black drink. Black drink is the only caffeinated beverage native to North America, and this is basically the only plant with caffeine in it in North America. Ilex cassina, or closely related species, has bigger leaves. That does have a tiny bit of caffeine, and it was thought possibly and used by some Florida natives for black drink, but probably wasn't. Very little caffeine in it. People will claim that cleavers or gallium species have caffeine in it. Oh, it's in the coffee family. It doesn't mean it has caffeine. Try to find any phytochemical research that says cleavers, fruits, those little seed-like things have any caffeine in them. It doesn't exist. Cleavers don't contain caffeine. But the way to prepare this drink is also very important. You do not want to prepare it just like a regular tea, where you just pour boiling water over it, and that would be a regular hot infusion. You want to make a decoction where you're actually boiling the leaves with the water, and you want to do that for a while actually. I dry the leaves, sometimes toast them, sometimes sort of intermediate. What really matters is you just remove all of the moisture and then crush them up, and that way the extraction is more efficient. And you make a decoction, and then some foam will actually boil up to the top, and if you skim off that foam and pour that in a secondary vessel, you can drink that, and it's like the espresso of yaupon holly. The whole plant tastes very similar to yerba mate and has very similar effects. It's in the same genus, yerba mate's Ilex species. It's a tree in South America. And they both contain theobromine, which is a component of chocolate, which makes you feel good. So it has slightly euphoric effects, and it has about 40% of the caffeine is coffee, and about 10 to 20% of the theobromine as cocoa beans. So very good chemical profile, and so it's historically consumed in vast quantities, both daily just for pleasure and for very large amounts for ritual purposes, such as the cleansing ceremony. So, well, you want to hear this. The cleansing ceremonies or purification rites are a very common feature among various American Indian tribes, in which the first fruits ceremony, for example, is one of them, where you want to purify your body and be ready to receive the first harvest of the year. So one good way to purify yourself is to remove whatever's inside. So natives from Florida to Texas would consume vast quantities of this species in particular and nothing else for days at a time, and be consuming probably plenty amount of the native tobacco species, Nicotiana rustica, Aztec tobacco. It's very potent, and to consume 4.5 gallons or 4 to 5 gallons of this per day, as was done in accordance with the writings of Cuvée de Vaca over in Galveston Island in the 1530s, you would need to purge yourself. So voluntary purging was conducted during these ceremonies, to both for spiritual purposes and to just physically allow the consumption of more black drink. So this drink or tree, no part of it causes emesis, at least not the leaves or any tea. You can make I challenge anyone who says the Ilex vomitoria causes vomiting to make a very strong decoction of it and try to drink that. It does not work, but it got that name Ilex vomitoria by what's his name, Ayton, in around the 1800s. People claim all sorts of crazy things for why he did that. Not necessarily crazy, but the simplest reason he did so is because this tree was strongly associated with those cleansing rituals of American Indians, and first seen in Florida. Sorry, I went on that for a long time. You can tell I've seen a lot of people claim that it causes vomiting, right? Yeah, so the juniper was used for an insane number of purposes. I mean, mostly the eastern red cedar and various western junipers. This is Ashe's juniper, Juniper's Ashe, which is essentially just a scrubby form of eastern red cedar, Juniper's virginiana. But it's useful for a lot of construction purposes. Its wood is extremely rot resistant, so you can use it for fence posts. That's what really white people really colonizing the hill country were called cedar choppers. People would go chop down a bunch of cedar trees to make fence posts. Highly lucrative. All of the original houses in the area were made of cedar wood. If you look around Austin, there's a bunch of historical homes, and they're all made of cedar wood siding and cedar shingle roofs. But Indigenous North Americans use a lot of cedar or juniper is a better name, for all sorts of purposes. Including house construction. So every element of the house, your posts, your rafters, you could even use the bark for the flooring, you can use the bark for thatching, and you can use the boughs for it. There was a belief among various native tribes that they did not get struck by lightning, so maybe a ball would be put atop a teepee to deter lightning strikes. But I think the fruit's really delicious. Try them. A lot of them aren't very good, but you can occasionally find some that are very nice, large, juicy, and sweet, just as there's some that are small, dry, and insipid. And the wood is very beautiful also. It's very nice wood to work. It's highly flammable. That's why the bark is good for it's tinder and all that stuff. I could probably go on this forever, but let's try to keep this as brief as possible. So, other species we're gonna have here. We got your honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle. Oh no, never mind. That's that is honeysuckle. You can suck out the honey from its flowers. Buckley's oak. Some nice galls growing on that. Acorns, of course. You can eat the acorns from all oak trees. Almost kind of crassifolia. Cedar elm is a very common element of these forests, but I don't really know that many uses for it. This is not mustang grape. Okay, so this is a challenge. Vitis Berlandieri is probably what this is. Gray bark grape, possibly. All grapes are edible and delicious, extremely important food sources historically for indigenous peoples. You can gather an insane amount of grapes in a very short time. The leaves are also edible, all grape species, but the other one, the mustang grape, isn't as good because they're thicker. They have more pubescence on the bottom of the leaf, whereas these are a little bit thinner, so you can eat them at a larger stage. But the vines themselves are also good for lashing. They make a nice little impromptu thing to tie with, and like rafters and such, and verticals or horizontals for house construction among various native housing in the southeast and west and all over were used. Vines were used or like lashed together a raft. Interesting one to point out, don't known uses, Garrya ovata, Lindheimer silk tassel, Garrya ovata subspecies Lindheimerii. Ooh, and one of my favorites, which reminds me, I have the seeds of this in my pocket because I gather tons of these Texas persimmon fruits. Here are the seeds. They have incredibly delicious black sweet flesh, tastes like chocolate plum persimmon pudding, and they have this smooth peeling grape bark, easy way to identify it. Only 1 in 10 trees is female though, so you can find a lot of sterile males, or not sterile, but they're just not going to be having fruits. But this is highly esteemed by Central Texas natives, and it really only grows in Central Texas or the hill country, so it's a very special, unique tree. There's one like it in Mexico called the chocolate pudding tree, or Zapote Negro, Diospyros nigra, or Diospyros digina. Here's some more yaupon holly. This one would be one I would go to for foraging because you can very easily just peel off all the leaves in a single go when it's these long straight shoots. So actually that's one big thing I keep in mind when I'm gathering yaupon holly. It's extremely abundant, but different growth forms have differing difficulty in harvesting. Being able to pull them all off in one go is what I look for. This is an interesting one. This is Tilia trifoliata, or hoptree, and the early settlers in Central Texas actually used those little fruits for hop substitutes. They're very bitter and hops-like in flavor. Basically, it tastes identical. The leaves, when crushed up, have a skunk-like smell. And the Menominee actually highly treasured the roots of this for medicine, for compounding medicine specifically, or making other medicines more potent in combination. But and a piece this big, as big as my pinky, would sell for as much as a horse or a pony. Anyway, here's some nice juniper sap. The sap of juniper can be used just like any pine tree. You can mix it with an even amount of crushed powdered charcoal and cook that over a fire and make pitch, perhaps even add a little bit of beeswax if you want the final product to be flexible, and that's basically the glue used all around the world. Mostly different pine species are used, but the juniper is perfectly usable. This is some nice fresh soft sap, and you can eat this. It's pretty good. It's nice and sweet and a little, I don't know, it's all right. Makes a good gum. Now we're going down in the canopy here, so we're getting into the walnuts. That's what this should be. I tend to smell it to distinguish whether it's walnut or pecan. They're both in the Juglandaceae, they're walnut family. Different genera, walnuts or juglans, and pecan is a hickory caryo. But yeah, this is Juglans major, Juglans nigra, eastern black walnut. Juglans major also probably occurs in the area, but this one would be the more common one. You can see the sort of form of those pinnately compound leaves. They have a nice fragrant smell to them. But the walnuts are a little bit hard to get to, but we're an important food source among indigenous people all throughout the eastern U.S. and into Canada. You can make some nice oil out of it. But this one is American beautyberry, Calicarpa americana. So we're getting our first off the bush ready wild edible here. Let me show you it. American beautyberry. Now these are edible, but they're not the best taste. And again, like most wild food products, they vary greatly by individual. And I've had some pretty good beautyberries. Let's see what about this one. It's about average. Strong floral taste, a little bit of perfumey, I might describe it as. Not super sweet, a little insipid, kind of like a mushier, foamy texture a bit. But I've had them juicier and sweeter for sure. But Calicarpa americanica is one of the only scientifically demonstrated plants to have anti-insecticide properties. Just fresh off the plant, you can crush it and or use an extract of it or something, a tincture, and that will repel mosquitoes and ticks. Calicarpinol is the chemical responsible for that. One more American beautyberry here. And I'm trying to only point out useful plants. But I am mentioning the very most common other species. This Leafigata sugarberry has a delicious little berries, are red and small, but very, very crunchy. They've got a very hard seed inside, but those are very nutritious. And the outer fleshy part is nice and sweet. Historically, very important food sources, or highly treasured food sources among people, not just in the Americas, but all around the world. A common method of preparation was crushing up the fruits and making into a paste and adding a little bit of grease or honey, or perhaps, and then molding that over the end of a stick and then cooking that over a fire of like little skewers. It's really good that way. Another alternative way is just making little lumps of it and cooking it in the oven like cookies. But definitely a little bit of a pain to crunch up in your teeth, and using a mortar pestle is easier. But sugarberry, this is it again, Celtis Leafigata. It's kind of considered a trash tree. It grows along fence lines because birds really love it, and birds will sit on the fences and poop it there, and then they're protected from lawnmowers just by being next to the fence. Very resilient, strong species, and you can actually make a tea out of the leaves in the early spring. The young, fresh leaves look a little bit like this, but even softer and more see-through. And that tea is pretty good. It tastes faintly of the namesake of its family, the Cannabaceae. This trail is getting a bit repetitive, so look at the smaller things, or go to a different habitat. Right here, Smilax bonanox out. This isn't a great example, but the foliage of all greenbriers is edible, and actually one of my favorite things to forage. One of the first things I ever foraged was Smilax bonanox. That's the most common species in this area. It has the smaller leaves and spotting on it sometimes. And the growing young tips of that are very delicious. They look kind of like asparagus. They have a nice crisp, clean texture, and someone's left like a giant mirror here and broken it. Like, what is wrong with people? What in the hell? Well, whoever did this probably should have taken a harder look first at themselves, because what the hell? Okay, distracted me, but the various greenbrier species are all edible. The growing young tips, even the parts that have thorns, while they're still young and tender, the thorns are still soft, and you can basically feel at the growing young tips where it starts to harden, and you can eat that whole thing. And another one, Smilax rotundifolia, or round leaf ground briar, that has even thicker stems and bigger leaves and even more dense spines, but they're all edible. And some eastern woodland tribes would use the roots of various greenbrier species to make a kind of starchy food grain. They have a lot of starches in them, but it's kind of a lot of work. You gotta pound them up and use water to extract the starches and congeal them. I tried to do that with the local species, but I think the soil here is just too rocky. It's never really going to be worth my time. But I'll show you what is beautiful and always worth your time is finding some mulberries. So mulberries are never, for me, it's one of the few things, it's not like an instant ID. Usually have to weigh several possibilities. I'm going with a pretty strong Morris rubra for this one, which means it is the native mulberry. People think of mulberries are all introduced. They're not. It's just the most common one that you see around cities and urban areas is introduced. That's Morris alba, white mulberry that's from China and Eurasia possibly. And that actually hybridizes with the native red mulberry. So sometimes it can be an additional layer of difficulty in identification. But Morris rubra is absolutely native to all of the eastern US, up to Canada and Texas. There's also another native species of mulberry, Morris microphila or Texas mulberry, that's also in Austin. I think this might be the only area where the two ranges of those two mulberries overlap. Could be wrong, but I've seen all three species in Austin. Mulberries, they all have delicious fruits available in the spring. We all probably know mulberry fruits. I was eating these also very young. But the native red mulberry has more matte leaves versus the glossy ones of the white mulberry. They also tend to be bigger and less lobed. So the white mulberry has smaller, glossier leaves that are more deeply lobed. And hybrids have intermediate characteristics. So the red mulberry does have leaf lobing, and it could depend on the growth of the location of that leaf's growth. But they got some really big leaves there, and some, only a few lobes here and there. But the mulberry is also not very well known for their use for bows. They're actually historically one of the most useful bow woods in all of the Americas. The Apache and Comanche and Tanoatim, the first two, which were very famed warriors in using bows as a primary weapon, considered mulberry wood to be the best bow wood, except for the Osage orange. The Comanche considered that to be superior, and they would have been using the Morris microphila or Morris rubra, the native mulberries. And I've made three bows now out of white mulberry, and all of them perform extremely excellently. A lot of modern bowyers are well aware that mulberry makes excellent bow wood. It's very elastic, and unlike Osage, it's pretty easy to carve, and it's also more common to find and less curvy, like finding a nice secondary branch or some secondary growth in young trees. It was actually how the Western Apache and Comanche did it, so that way you don't have to cut down a whole tree and split it. But it makes it easier that way, especially if you only have stone tools. If you haven't seen it, I have a video showing me making a bow out of mulberry with only stone tools. Did the bowstring and arrows also, all stone Paleolithic technology, following historical methods of indigenous peoples in North America. Okay, so where are we? Ulmus americana, American elm, also very common. Okay, so here's the possumhaw, very useful to distinguish against the yaupon holly. See how those leaves are not as glossy. It's still kind of glossy, but the biggest difference is that tapering leaf base. The leaf base of yaupon is ovate. It does not have a tapering towards the base of the leaf. Otherwise, they're pretty much identical, occurring in the exact same habitat. See, this is yaupon holly right next to it. No tapering leaf base, but their foliage can be like intermixed. Okay, so here's the edible little growing tips of Smilax boninox, like I was talking about. So this is probably edible up to about right here. That's where I can feel the stem is getting a little bit too hard. Maybe even actually just like right here. But you can eat this foliage and all these growing young tips. It's a very nice little snack. Deer also love it. So you often find vines with the tips bitten off. Don't confuse it with right in the same habitat, Carolina snail seed. I mean, to me, these look nothing alike, but one difference is just that shorter leaf shape. These are wider than they are long, whereas greenbrier tend to be longer than they are wide. They also have a different type of venation where the greenbrier have a very arcuate, kind of wanting to be parallel leaf venation, whereas these just have a sort of standard sort of palmate branching. Ooh, and now there's one of my favorites. This one's kind of doing something funky here. Looks like it broke off, and they got a vine growing on it too. But this is Lactuca cereola, prickly wild lettuce. And the reason I know it's in the Lactuca genus, which I'm trying to show you here, is, well, it's not a very good example of that, but it has a row of spines along the underside of the midrib of the leaf. Wow, this one's actually one of the worst demonstrators of that characteristic I've ever seen. I can see this like almost vestigial. That's weird. But anyway, sorry about that. It has a milky white sap. It has a dandelion-like flowers and fruits, those little puff balls it'll put out. And it looks like a giant overgrown dandelion. But I find this species very useful. You can use it for, oh, here's some more. I'll look at some characters on this one. Wow, these guys are all like really lacking on that character of the, I can feel them, but I don't think the camera's gonna pick it up. This unusual little morph here. Here's some more. We'll find them. Still all kind of exhibiting that same characteristic. This is a little bit frustrating. They're probably all related here. Anyway, we got some more wild lettuce. That one is huge. I almost never see them growing that tall. But you can eat the whole plant. The whole plant is pretty raw, or pretty bitter when raw, but makes an excellent tea for sleeping. So the way I use it is to make a tea, and I will take like a cup of the dried leaves. I'll cut down a whole one of these, and then dry it all, and then crush it up. You can use scissors to kind of cut up the stems, and then I boil that in water, except not really boiling. I want it below boiling, basically just barely simmering for about 10 minutes. I'll make a very dark decoction and drink that all down. It's basically just drink a whole lot of really bitter juice of it, and it'll help you sleep for sure, and give you vivid dreams on top of it. Here's another example of poison ivy demonstrating its high morphological variability. This one has kind of sharp serrations. That's something that's seen pretty usually, but what it still has in common is alternate branching, a longer petiole, symmetrical lobing, so the mitts on the outside and the symmetrical in the center, a slight reddish tint to its stems as the fruits that are smooth hanging and off-white or greenish tannish. And poison ivy, so that's Toxicodendron radicans or eastern poison ivy, and poison ivy can be an ivy or it can be a little shrub. It can be even a full standing, almost like tree. Like it can get really tall. I've seen it about 12 feet tall, freestanding, not climbing on anything, just going straight up. It can also just grow as kind of what looks like a little seedling. That's where poison oak gets the name. It looks kind of like some oak seedlings. Or it can just grow up like a vine, and it's perfectly happy doing any of those. It just wants to be here so it can hurt you. No, it doesn't actually really hurt you. You hurt yourself, because poison ivy doesn't actually cause a direct toxic rash, and what it does is it binds to your skin cells, and it marks those skin cells to your own immune system as foreign, and so your immune system is attacking your own cells because it has the markers given by the root gel, and so that's what causes the inflammation and dermatitis and rashes following that. So there's multiple ways to avoid that. First, be immune. Okay, you can get immunity by possibly, this is just conjecture, not a lot of studies on it, but by long-term, low-level, continuous exposure starting at a young age and continuing on through adulthood. And there is probably some genetic component to it. You can also, if you get exposed to poison ivy, if you rub it on your skin, if you go and wash it off immediately or as soon as possible, that will be very helpful because it's an oil. It takes about 30 minutes for those oils to bind to your skin cells to produce that effect. So if you can wash it off before then, great. Using cold water and soap is going to be even more helpful because it is an oil. You can also put grease on your skin like the early colonists of Texas to try to avoid infection by it. But things in the habitat that also look similar to it, so I already said boxelder just because of the leaf shape, but for its vine form and just kind of just this overall affect, a little bit of reddishness, some little stems. This is a Virginia creeper, Parthenocytis quinquefolia. Quinquefolia means five-leafed. And these have different roots on their, they have these aerial roots that kind of, they're stronger and more lateral. The ones from poison ivy tend to be more hair-like in all directions going. But obviously the quinquefolia, the five leaves, they can actually be 7 or 9 or more leaves also, but tend to be 5 leaves. The poison ivy never does that. It's always 3 leaflets per leaf. Parthenocytis quinquefolia, Virginia creeper, always has 5 or more per leaf. But this one actually might have some edible uses. I'm not going to say any of them though, because I'm still researching that. But there's some very interesting claims out there. Here's some nice grapevine. Grapevine always has a signature look to its bark. And you can actually drink the sap of grape vines. It tastes kind of just like grape juice. In some survival manuals, U.S. Army survival manual. I don't know why I went backwards there. The wild lettuce, though actually the sap of wild lettuce has been used to combat the dermatitis caused by poison ivy, as have a decoction of sagebrush, so Artemisia ludoviciana, or silverleaf wormwood, or silverleaf sagebrush. Decoction of that was used. Also, people are very well of the jewelweed for some reason. That also is an indigenous knowledge there from the Potawatomi. It was the original document showing that jewelweed or impatiens capitata is useful for combating dermatitis from poison ivy. Sycamore platanus occidentalis, mainly useful for its wood. Some tribes actually, kind of the far north, used it for bow wood, but they're pretty limited in their selection. Oh, I didn't mention, well, I'll see more. Chinaberry, Bumelia azedarac, also possibly useful for bows of all things, but this is introduced species. I wouldn't really call it invasive. This is in the wild here, so, but it doesn't as much, especially compared to Nandina or ligustrum, push out native plant species. I usually only see one here or there, so I wouldn't call it as much of a problem invasive. Anyway, it was used for the hoop and the hoop and dart game of the Comanche. Also the regular soapberry. So Chinaberry looks a lot like the native soapberry. There's some more Japanese honeysuckle. I think we found who broke the mirror. Why is there just a mirror in a chair right here? That's actually kind of creepy. It costs more water. Oh, it's like, what is, I've never seen so many Carolina snail seed fruits. First I thought of this. It's like, what is this, like some new thing? No, it's just a very densely fruiting Carolina snail seed. I pointed this out earlier to distinguish it from the greenbrier, the smilax vine. It's a really common one. I'm gonna start going down the creek here to look for that special species that I was talking about at the beginning. By the way, this is some interesting stuff. Ambrosia. Dang it, the scientific name is escaping right now. But this species was used to put on like ringworm, or like damage from horse flies and lesions on livestock. Also used similar for humans. But why can't I think of it? I'm sorry. And Leucaemus arborea, pepper vine, not edible. In the grape family though. Cephalanthus occidentalis bush. This is all not edible. It's actually pretty toxic. I wouldn't mess with that one. But this is the prized arrowwood of the Comanche. This is the preferred arrowwood, roughleaf dogwood, Cornus drummondii. Dogwood also have that arcuate leaf venation and kind of white berries. But it has really good quality wood for arrows. I think one big reason is just the way it grows. It's normally around the diameter one would want for arrows. It's pretty easy to straighten and retains its shape pretty well, and it grows in nice thickets where you can get a lot of it of just around the right dimensions. And the biggest part of arrow working is just sizing them down. So Cornus drummondii, other arrow woods or other dogwood species were also commonly used for arrows. Principal food fish in this area is going to be your sunfish and your bass. And some nice striped bass. Morning glory, convolvulus. Oh, there we got some bald cypress, Taxodium disticum. I'm glad you didn't hear all that rant about the bald cypress. It was embarrassing. Basically, this is Taxodium disticum, and this was the preferred tree for canoes, for dugout canoes among southeastern tribes. And these were super magnificent. The biggest bald cypress trees can be 100 feet plus, unless a meth head burns it down in Florida. But De Soto, the first Spanish expedition to the southeast, wrote of seeing fleets of these dugout canoes, and they were capable of holding 70 or 80 men, and either armed or oarsmen, and capable of going faster than the European boats were. So very cool species, very rot and water rot resistant. So it was being used for keels until pretty recent times, and also for destruction of docks, for the construction of anything where it's going to be water tanks it was even used for. So very quickly on in central Texas, those trees were cut down, used for lumber, for all those different applications, because they're very useful for that. They contain compounds which preserve them very well. So you don't see as many big ones, unfortunately, but it is related to the giant redwood, and it's related to both the tallest tree in the world and the widest tree in the world. The widest tree in the world is Montezuma cypress, or Taxodium, I don't know. And the redwood Sequoia sempervirens, also in the same family, Cupressaceae. And this is often water penny. People say it's edible. I've eaten it. Doesn't taste very good. So, edible, sure. Good. It's Salix nigra, black willow. What's that stuff over there? It's along all the creeks in the area. There's another big one right there. But walnuts are also a main component of this riparian zone. Glossy privet, Ligustrum lucidum, introduced species, probably one of the worst invasives in the area. But the fruits of it are commonly used in traditional Chinese medicine. So the Salix nigra, the many different willows are basically all used for the same stuff. which is construction basketry. It has very flexible wood, so you can take the shoots and use it for basketry, or use it for bending over in a dome shape and making a nice little hut, steam hut, or for if you're building a big wiki upper house, you can have the horizontal poles or the vertical poles, and then use the horizontal wrappings of willow. Also commonly used for sort of medicinal uses, such as breaking a fever. Aspirin is the source of salicylic acid. Salicaceae is the willow family, and they all have that in it. And so it's the origin of aspirin comes from, I don't know actually what species exactly it came from, but similar compounds, so good for breaking a fever, possibly some other ailments. But you can actually even use it for bows, and the bark of it peels off very nicely and is pretty useful for cordage, assorted uses. So all this stuff right over here is Eleucharis. It's a type of rush. It's the Spargiaceae. These can all be used for basketry. It's not the best material. It's a little bit weak, but it works, especially for coiled basketry. So what you do is you take a little bundle of it, and then you coil it like how my fingers are coiling around it in a continuous coil, and then take that piece and then coil that up and build up a basket from that. Seeing any of the came down here for it. I think it's not till further up. Taking too long talking about every plant in existence. I'll try to quit. Keep quiet. I'm gonna turn off the camera because there's people up here and I don't want to be rude. Whoa, red dog. We're past the people. Here's a good example of that. It's called in Chinese medicine, or I guess the Latin term for it is Ligustrum lucidi fructi. These turn a purple, blackish colors, but that's about their final size. It's Ligustrum lucidum, or glossy privet. A lot of people call it Japanese, or it's Ligustrum. And we're starting to get into possible habitat for the species I'm hunting right now. It specifically likes muddier areas. It needs to be muddy but wet. This is a species of mint. Mentha, really hard to ID without you, but this is probably escaped from a garden at some point. Mentha piperita, which is a hybrid of its own. This probably has its own genetics, so I don't even try to ID them to species. I just call it mentha, and the smell alone is probably enough to diagnose them, but they have arcuate leaves, venation there, but square stems. The cross-section of their stems is square, but that's characteristic of all things in the Lamiaceae or mint family. But water personally, I don't know. Anyway, mint is delicious for tea. Also great for deodorizing. One interesting use of it was to boil traps, to deodorize like animal traps. You have to remove the scent. And one way to deodorize them would be to boil them in mint leaves. But, it's a good carminative, so reduces gas for digestion, and it relaxes the smooth muscles of the intestine. It's not like a laxative or anything, but it's a relief for upset stomach. I mean, we all know what mint's good for, right? People, what are we doing here? We really don't know mint. I'm sorry. Let me ramble on about plants. It's a dangerous thing. Ooh, I see what I've come for. No, I'm not going to harvest that one. It's a bad location. And also just, I would never harvest the first of any plant that I saw. But, in Austin, I grew up calling these elephant ears, and they're all by Town Lake. I'm sorry, Ladybird Lake. Elephant ears. That's what it's commonly called. They get big, much bigger than this actually, but a very common aquatic plant. It doesn't necessarily grow in the water all the time, but in the soil next to water, so it always has access to water. But I'm sure there'll be more further upstream. But so, I'll wait to talk about it until I find more. Here's a little bit more. Still not gonna try to harvest these or anything. But it's a very cool, memorable plant. It is not native to the U.S. There's some more. They have a very distinct color to their leaves, so I can pick it out from the background vegetation. It's almost bluish, darker cast. The leaves, especially those in the shade. Colocasia esculenta taro calo. You can eat every part of the plant as long as it's cooked. It contains calcium oxalates in its flesh, or raffied needle-like plant structures, crystals which will irritate your skin or your digestive tract and feel like burning just by way of mechanical harm on your body's cells. But if you cook them, it neutralizes those compounds, and this historically has been one important food for cuisines globally, and for many years. It's probably one of the earliest cultivated plant, if not the earliest cultivated plant, probably indigenous to this plant was originally native to the Indo-Malayan area, so it's common in Southeast Asian cuisines, but it's also well known in East Asian cuisine, and it's pan-tropical, so also very common in African cuisine, and most prominently for my purposes Polynesian cuisine, because Hawaii is still part of the U.S., so I'm looking at indigenous North Americans. I don't know if that really counts, but I'm making it count, so I look at the accounts of the Hawaiian, native indigenous Hawaiian uses of taro, or as they call it, kalo. And the word luau comes from the leaves of this, the cooked leaves of them. They did eat both the leaves and the roots. They have these nice big edible corms in the botanical term. Corm is just a root stock plant that stores a lot of its carbohydrates in. But the different parts feature in different dishes of every imaginable variety all over the world. So this is why it's kind of crazy that I never really got into this one, or I've literally never tried this species. But they said they have to be cooked, cleanse it in the earth oven, take the root, pound it up, add a little bit of water as you go to make poi, essentially, at the end. And that could be allowed to ferment for a couple of days as desired by taste. But the most important cultivated plant for indigenous Hawaiians historically, kalo, taro, but sweet potato would be second. Sweet potatoes actually came the other way from South America to Polynesia. Poi comes from the root of this. You can buy it in grocery stores in Hawaii today if you want. So, a fascinating plant. I still, plenty to do. Oh, the cooked leaves be used to like wrap some fish, and then you wrap that package in the leaves like I think it's not a palm, it's an Asparagaceae. It's a tropical species. We don't have it. But basically just an outer wrapping to prevent the leaves from getting dirty as they're buried in the earth oven. The closest related species to that in Texas that we would have would be like yucca leaves. But I'm going to try cooking these the traditional Indigenous Hawaiian way, and it sounds pretty good. So we'll see how it goes. I'll make a video about that. So let me know what you think about this video. That's really all I'm going to go for today. I've been talking to you. I'm sure you're sick of it, but I wanted to make it at least to this plant, just see what I could find along the way. As a different type of format and a lot more information held in here. So I hope you find it valuable. I hope you can hear me. I don't know about the audio. This is a whole kind of different setup that I have here. And yeah, lots of other videos on every species I mentioned. Basically, I have individuals videos on those, and in many cases showing specific applications of various food preparation methods and primitive skills and so forth. So check them out.